My own favorites in terms of Lovecraft stories tend to shift, but I still regard At the Mountains of Madness as his premier work of fiction. And Lovecraft actually came to believe that too. He actually once said it was his best work of fiction. I think the combination of science and horror in that story is unmatched in any other work of literature I've ever read.
For a second we gasped in admiration of the scene's unearthly cosmic beauty, and then a vague horror began to creep into our souls. For this far violet line could be nothing else than the terrible mountains of the Forbidden Land, harborers of nameless horror and arcane secrets, shunned and prayed to by those who feared to carve their meaning, untrodden by any living thing of earth.
On the other hand, he wrote some very powerful stories that capture both the wonder and the terror of the New England landscape. I think in this regard, two stories stand out: The Whisper in Darkness and The Shadow over Innsmouth.
My favorite Lovecraft story is The Shadow over Innsmouth. And that was, after the success of Reanimator, that was the story I wanted to do next. And it took me 15 years to finally get it made. And it was released under the title Dagon, because we used elements of that story as well.
Another genealogical anomaly. There are denizens of Innsmouth that are not Homo sapien. They are some hybrid thereof that possess many of the characteristics we would associate with fish. Now, at first, this may seem strange, shocking, and even grotesque.
This was the dream where I saw Shoggoth for the first time, and the sight set me awake in a frenzy of screaming. That morning, the mirror definitely told me I had acquired the Innsmouth look.
Favorite Lovecraft story, I think, would be The Haunter of the Dark. It's a good one. He dedicated that to Robert Bloch. His investigator in the story is a man called Robert Blake. You know, Robert Bloch, Robert Blake. And that's the story in which he lists, Lovecraft lists stories by Robert Blake. And one of the stories he lists, fictional stories, they haven't been written, was The Burrows Beneath. Who could resist that title? I couldn't. So I wrote my first novel in the mythos, The Burrows Beneath, based on that mention in that story. Haunter of the Dark, yeah. If not that, then the other one would be The Color Out of Space, which I believe is it's not a mythos story. I don't think it is anyway. Some people will argue with me. But there's no forbidden books, there's no dark gods, there's no nasty crawly creatures in it. There is a very, very alien feel to it. It's a frightening story. It's a good story.
I think probably The Color Out of Space, because it does some really strange and interesting things. And it's not really, it's not of the mythos, but it's informed by the mythos. It's not the kind of story in which anybody, dances around singing Ayah Shabnigarath, the goat with 1,000 young. Yet, it is entirely and utterly, it's just the most entirely Lovecraftian story there is, because of the wrongness. Something's happened. This meteor or whatever's come down. And from here on out, everything on this farm is progressively wronger.
He had seen that color before and feared to think what it might mean. He had seen it in the nasty brittle globule 2 summers ago, had seen it in the crazy vegetation of the springtime, and had thought he had seen it for an instant that very morning against the small, barred window of that terrible attic room where nameless things had happened.
My favourite has still got to be The Colour Out of Space, I think. I mean, I've got all sorts of others that I greatly admire. But I don't think it's only because that was the first one I ever read. I think that is his perfect symbol for what he was trying to do, the utter alienness of the rest of the universe and the fact that it's utterly indifferent to humanity. And the fact that, there are none of the names and references from the mythos because he hadn't really got around to constructing that yet. And all it is something that, it's an extraordinary extraordinary device. Really. It's very simple. In one sense, he can be described as a colour that is no colour we have ever seen. And in that very nature, because in terms of words, in terms of language, it's indescribable. And this exactly sums up the sense of the alien that he wants. But it's also, I think, is a great structure as a story. I mean, the fact that, one of the things that Lovecraft devoted his career to do was trying to find the perfect structure for the supernatural horror story, or the weird tale, as he preferred to call it, I think. I mean, there's no finer example than that one. I think, it bears repeated reading, and we can still learn a great deal from it.
And also, of course, there is the outsider, just because it was the first. Just the ghoul coming up, or basically the narrator coming up from this incredibly deep place, and coming up and then going out into the garden in the moonlight, and the people seeing him and screaming, and him fleeing back down, and he realizes, as we realize, that he is some kind of ghoul or dead thing or buried thing. You never really know. And there was a joy in darkness, which I don't think I'd ever encountered before.
Lovecraft's position now is secure. I mean, I think there's no question now that he's regarded as an important writer whose work will last, and the fact that he's now published in Penguin Modern Classics, I think, is a very strong indication of that. Now, there are always going to be people who don't get Lovecraft, who don't like his work. I mean, M.R. James didn't, Robert Aikman didn't, but the people, there are many who do. Whereas someone like M.R. James, who I greatly admire, when you reread him, what you're getting is the same experience again, maybe possibly reduced a little. In Lovecraft, it's quite often a quite different experience, because you find different things there. So yes, I mean, there's no question that one, he will last, and two, yes, there is something of a renaissance, and I think that as new generations discover him, they may very well find just different perspectives on him, which we haven't spotted yet.
I'll tell you, at conventions, various conventions, I've met people who only read Lovecraft. Now then, forget your fear of the dark or your fear of alien creatures hovering on the borders of reality waiting to break in. I'm frightened of these guys who've only read Lovecraft. There's something wrong there somewhere.
The one great crusade worthy of an enlightened man is that directed against whatever impoverishes imagination, wonder, sensation, dramatic life, and the appreciation of beauty. Nothing else matters. And not even this really matters in the great void, but it is amusing to play a little in the sun before the blind universe dispassionately pulverizes us again into the primordial nothingness from whence it molded us for a second sport.